Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Life Shift podcast. I am here with someone that I've been talking to for a few minutes now, so you don't get to hear that. But hi, Lisa.
Hello, Matt. Great to be here.
We have Lisa Cooper here, and she's going to tell you all about her life story and where she's going. But I think I'm looking forward to your conversation. As we were talking before we recorded, I mentioned to you or reminded you of something that the listeners know. I don't do a lot of research. I don't do any research, actually. And I send my guests that one form that you had, which maybe had like 3 questions and like send me your picture kind of thing. And I love having just that 1 or 2 sentences about your life shift because I feel like it gets me in the headspace, but also it doesn't put any kind of questions in my head. So welcome to the experience that we're calling the Life Shift podcast.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt. When you were talking just now, it reminded me that because you're not researching your guests, you're in a heart space too. Because
I try.
a place of, no judgment. And I'm just going to open these people onto the show and we'll have a phenomenal conversation. So thank you for that.
Right. I think, there are plenty of podcasts out there where experts can come on and teach us the top 3 things that we could do in this space or the top 5 things we should never do in that space. But, my true want for the Life Shift podcast is that maybe this is maybe like a big idea, but maybe people listening feel inspired to have these types of conversations with the people around them. And feel comfortable asking the questions that aren't so surface level.
Yeah.
And
maybe probing on what does a life shift look like. And, I know personally, well, first of all, I'm Lisa Cooper. Thank you for having me. And I'm right now, I'm the co-founder of a company called Workplace Healing. I'm an author. I wrote a book after my mother passed away. And I'm also a mom and a wife and a daughter. So I guess those things.
You're a human.
And no priority because mom, wife, daughter's right up there, right? But when you talk about life shift, and interestingly enough, when I was listening to your podcast, sometimes at the time, we don't realize we're in a shift until we look back and really garner the lessons, the impact, and the effect it's had on our souls. And and I sometimes when I was thinking about the podcast this morning and kind of thinking through, what I might say and what I might help your listeners with, one of the things that came to mind is that oftentimes I feel like life can be a bit like a puzzle. And we've got all these pieces, but as we go through these different experiences, we begin to put these pieces together. Because, for example, just a quick background, my professional background was in advertising and marketing. And I loved that career. And it was gratifying, crazy, and
always different.
A bit of a roller coaster, But I look at that piece of the puzzle. And then I look at the piece of the puzzle of being a daughter and after my mother passed away, I wrote a book to inspire others on how love never dies, which I'll come back to that. And then taking the marketing, the book, the lessons I learned about death and about grief, and then applying it to how can we help people with grief in corporate America? How can we train managers on what to say to people when someone comes back from bereavement? So getting back to the puzzle pieces point, I didn't until recently, I look back at workplace healing and I can see clearly that the puzzle pieces came together. The business strategy component, the marketing component, the heart part of being able to talk to grievers after I wrote a book. And I realized I'd talk to the grievers at maybe an evening event or at a lunch event. And I also realized they were going back to work and they were going back to work discouraged, grieving, and not 100% present. And so I realized there was a disconnect there. And then I also realized that when I wrote the book, it's my spiritual book. It's not a corporate book at all. It's a short memoir about the experiences I had after my mother passed away. And you're
just giving all the secrets to your story.
I don't know.
Right at the front.
No secrets anymore, right? But it's interesting because my mom passed away in 2011, and immediately I started like having dreams, having signs, and really feeling her presence. And that's not my corporate message,
Yeah.
but it was my personal experience that literally took me from being a very left-brained, linear business strategist, marketing brain to a right brain, more open, more creative, perhaps believing in things you cannot see, and changing my personal shift of awareness of life.
Yeah.
So that shift, again, the puzzle pieces of going back and thinking about experiences and putting it all together to take us more towards our life purpose, and
I think so.
you know,
I mean, I think honestly, I think we have had this conversation with a lot of people is, each decision that we're making truly is like another opportunity for your life to go in a completely different direction.
hmm
And, it sounds like you have the two sides of shifts that I talk to a lot of people about, or the way that I've kind of categorized them. I myself had a very external shift, which you can also relate to, in the sense that I had no control over the shift that was truly going to change everything that was in my life. So, I'm 8 years old living with my mom in Massachusetts. My dad's living in Georgia. My mom dies. I suddenly have one parent. I suddenly have to go live with my non-primary parent who wasn't quite, ready to take on that responsibility. Started a new school. It was the
oh
beginning of the school
yeah,
year, different accents.
I
That
remember you
plays
said that in the
a role
podcast.
into
It's
that.
from the, you said that you had an accident of being an 8 year
Yeah.
old and being different and coming in on the second
Yeah.
week of school and after your mom passed away. How horrible.
Yeah.
Yes.
But we have these moments like that one. Literally, like, there was nothing I could do about it. I couldn't stay in my existing house. I couldn't go to my existing school. There was a lot of things like that. But then there are other moments in which it's an internal fire. It's something that like, something happens inside us, whether that's kind of your experience that we're going to talk about. I think we'll go into more detail about what you've kind of hinted
hmm
at already. But, you know, it's so interesting to me to see how they kind of all interplay.
hmm
And so many people talk about that butterfly effect of like, had I just, opened that door 2 minutes earlier, XYZ could have happened. Or had I, run down the road on the other direction
Yeah.
for my run, I wouldn't have been hit by like whatever that may be.
Right.
And, it's so interesting that if we get, or if we're lucky enough to get to the place in which we can look back on those moments and reflect and see what can we learn from that?
Right.
What have we grown because of that? I mean, it took me like 20 years or 20 plus years to even like analyze like the effect beyond like the surface level obvious effects of like what it did to me and
hmm
how I let it do all that to me. I didn't know better, but I also let it do it to me, right? And so I think we get lucky when we're able to analyze those moments and see how, in your example, these puzzle pieces kind of all fit together. Like, you would never, if you took this high level view of your life, 10, 15 years ago, and you look down, you would just see them as these like separate puzzle pieces
Exactly.
before they kind of started interlocking. But I think that's a lot of your work. I think that's a lot of human work
hmm
to make those puzzle pieces go together. I don't think it's just like, ooh, everything,
Right. 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 Yeah. Well,
So
yes.
it's
It's
just so, it's fascinating. But maybe we can have you kind of lead us up to those. I mean, I feel like there's a couple little moments in that big shift. You have like that external and internal pieces that are happening to you. So maybe you can tell us like what your life was like a little bit before, like leading up to that, so that we can see
sure.
kind of how these changes have made.
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, I was in marketing and advertising, and a mom, and which was very fun. Our daughter actually is in college now, so empty nesting is a different journey, but it's a
Mm.
it's a fun journey as well. But when my mother passed away, it was a shift. I'm an only
Yeah,
child, and she's an only child. Actually, our daughter's an only child, and so there's
me too.
okay, well, the land of only children here.
Yes.
But there's a special bond, I believe. And again, I would never have considered myself a writer, not even a person that particularly kept a journal. And But after my mom passed away, I just began to write and pause. And my mother was one to say to me while she was alive, Lisa, you've got to take time to be. And instead
Mm,
of always being a human doing, try to be a human being. And it was
mm,
hard to articulate those words when I was busy and being a mom, and you have a lot of parenting responsibilities, professional responsibilities. But I remembered thinking, okay, one of these days I will be more. I will be
mm.
more. That will be my goal.
Right.
But it literally, with her passing, for some reason, there was a personal shift that I felt in my heart that I worked to be more. And
Mm,
part of it was a slowdown. I think sometimes when our loved ones pass away, we go through a period that I used to call the business of death, and that is the furniture, the clothes, the things, the house. And when my mom passed away, my father was still alive at that point in time, and really left it up to me to do a lot of the purging, if you will, and so, which was fine. And actually, it was a cathartic journey for me because it offered me the opportunity to have some beautiful memories when I was going through
yeah.
things. But specifically, that really was when a big shift for me occurred because I just felt a new, I guess you could just say, a new insight into life and death
After, like, how long you're saying, like,
after she
after the grieving period?
Well,
Yeah.
after
During that?
just, like, she passed
How
away on
long
October 2nd, 2011,
mhm.
and it's been a long time, but a long time ago, but, I would say within a couple of weeks, I
Mm,
really,
pretty quick.
felt her presence, and
I have a question
yes.
before you jump into that.
Mhm.
I'm gonna be known for this, like, checklist life comment, but I say it pretty much on every
Yeah,
episode because I very much ascribe to this, and it sounds like you were very, like, driven. Like, it sounds like your mom was like, "You don't have to accomplish all the things,"
exactly.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I was like, I grew up feeling, and part of this was, like, my obligation to feeling like nobody would abandon me if I did all these things,
Mm.
but I also think society around, maybe up until recently was very much like you have to graduate high school and then you have to go to college, then you have to get a good job, then you have to get married, then you have to have kids, and then you have to buy a house. And then, like, and everything was like this very much a checklist for me. And it sounds like maybe, well, actually, I'll ask you, were you someone that as soon as you check something off the list, there was always another thing on the list to accomplish or do?
I would say yes to that.
And maybe that's kind of in the way that your mom was like,
Yeah,
there's more out
yeah.
here,
You
like
can
if
take a breath.
we don't check things off. Because I'm very much like, I have checklists all over my desk
Oh,
still,
I know.
and it's very satisfying, right? Because you're like, yeah, I did another thing.
Yeah,
But when we stop and think about it, not too many people care
yeah.
that we just did that next thing.
You're
And
absolutely
so I can,
right. You're absolutely right.
and the same thing, kind of what you're saying, is that, like, when your mom passed, probably that echo of her saying you need to be more, but now you had this opportunity, you've accomplished the things, getting rid of things, and the business of grief, is that what you said?
Oh, I called it the business of death, but yes.
Business
Mhm,
of death.
mhm.
Yeah, you just take care of all the things, it keeps you busy, it's a checklist, it's another thing to accomplish, but then when there's time to sit, you realize, okay, what is actually important to me?
Mhm,
What's And I had the same thing when I watched my grandmother die.
mhm.
So I just wanted to interject that idea of, like, go, 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 accomplish things, performative kind of mentality, because I think so many people can relate to this. And then it takes, I don't know, was this your first experience with a major loss?
My grandparents had passed away before that, but I
Yeah.
would say, and that was, I loved them very, very much, but it was different
Yeah.
with my mother.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Why do you think it was different with your
I
mom?
just think we were, we were closer. I mean, I loved my grandparents, but just a different,
Hmm.
I think, I guess we just spent more time together. I'll just,
Yeah.
it's interesting because, I think back to even a lot of trips that we'd taken before I got married,
Mm,
and just experiences that we had again, looking back and saying, wow, I can see why that happened because it opened my heart to hear something else later, or a book particularly, or even after. I don't know if you had this with your grandmother, but I kept a lot of the books, And,
Mm.
I would open them at a certain time, and there'd be like a bookmark where she'd written a note on it. And it was appropriate to whatever I was maybe going through at the time. And
Yeah.
you just
Was she more like that through life? Was she more like the heart centered, the
yes, yes.
heart first kind of
Yeah,
person?
yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. And so she was probably like
Yeah.
that guide that you weren't listening to until it was time to listen
You're
to.
right. Yeah. And it's interesting
Yeah, I
because, like,
feel
my father, on the other hand, was a Marine
uh,
and an engineer. And so it's interesting how, I guess it's interesting how opposites attract, but
yeah.
specifically how, with one parent being very Mother Earth like and the other being very analytical, and then sometimes I think as children, we kind of tend to go maybe towards one or maybe land in the middle, ideally. But I think, again, the pivot moment of just the lessons I learned from her insights, if you will, and which what led me to the book to help people understand that love never dies. That was always
Mm,
my headline. To help people
yeah.
understand that love never dies, and to let them know that that energy of love never goes away.
It's interesting. I don't know that I have that same feeling, which is fine. I think it well, at least about my mom,
Hmm. Hmm.
because I was so
You were
young.
so
I
young.
didn't I didn't know what I don't think I knew what love was outside of what I experienced there. And I didn't really and part of it is that my parents divorced young. So there was a lot of like not it wasn't bad, in a bad sense, but it was always a fractured kind of family.
Hmm.
And so it's interesting because I hate saying this now, but it's true. I don't remember my mother. And essentially my mother is kind of like a figment of like it's like I knew I had one
Hmm.
and I knew she existed,
Hmm.
but I don't remember her.
Hmm.
And it's hard to say that, but I think it's also part of that grieving journey that I've been on.
Right.
And so it's so, and people like you were able to live a lot of your life with your mother.
Yes.
And so after she died and you got into this period of where you were thinking, okay, I'm going to be more, I'm going to live in this be space. Like, was there something that like do you feel like something specifically triggered you to open up that a
Yes.
little bit
It's
more?
when I literally started to experiencing some unusual circumstances that
Mm,
were beyond my left brain to understand. And just like one example, it was about a few months after she passed away, and my dad and I were talking about selling their house because really he was going to look for like a maintenance-free villa type arrangement. And it was a very stressful time at that point in time, personally for me, and just a lot going on with my some advertising work and just some other things that were happening in my world. And I had a dream where my mom came to me and she said, Lisa, and this would be like she would say in on Earth, she would say, try not to be so stressed out right now. Number
mm,
one. And she said the painter that you and your dad have hired is going to reschedule for Saturday when you've got more time. And she gave me the exact dates, October 24th, October 26th.
wow.
And then I woke up and wrote those dates down because I thought, okay, there's some things happening that I can't explain right now. And about an hour later, the painter called and he said, I'm so sorry. He said, I've got to reschedule for Saturday. Are you and your dad going to be available? And I said, yes. And from that moment on, I'd already had many dreams about her after she passed
Wow.
away. But after I called it the October paint dream with the dates, I realized that this was something that was occurring that was beyond my imagination and that was
Hmm.
beyond the physical. And that's when I really began to understand that there's a lot of things going on with our brains. We only perceive about 1 to 2% of what's around us, and that 98% of what's occurring. Just like Einstein even said, the energy never goes away; it just changes form. That's really when I realized that we're never alone in our grief journeys.
So were those moments for you like were those hard for you to embrace because of your kind of the way that you operated before in your
Well,
corporate
I
kind of
think that's
life?
a great question. I questioned them.
Yeah. But
And
did you try to explain them away?
at first, yes, of course, yeah, yeah. And but then I realized, and I think that on some level, that was part of the lesson that I needed to go through to be able to embrace something that maybe wasn't rationally defined.
Yeah.
But I then it became very gratifying for me. And then the more I embraced it, the more experiences I had, which led me to the book, which led me to really help people when they're grieving, to let them know that they're not alone. And again, it's not. Then it shifted towards. Well, I'll stop for a second and then tell you how I met my co-founder,
Yeah.
and that's kind of leads to a whole nother journey as part of the puzzle piece.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there, because I think, you know, coming from that corporate world, I feel
Mhm.
like working in corporate, there's always an answer. There's always like, oh, well, there's always a result. There's always like some kind of data that we can back things up because we're working on these projects,
Mhm.
especially in your world. You're like, especially in advertising, you're like, here are the numbers. This proves that this was a good project.
Right.
And I think so many people are in that, you know, everyday kind of feeling. And when you see something or you hear something or you envision something, I think that would be hard for a lot of people to kind of to move forward with. Was this something that was just like happening on the daily? Was it something that was happening sporadically? How often was something like punching you in the face trying to wake you up to this experience and this reality for you?
I would say that it was a weekly occurrence at the beginning.
Okay.
Um,
And it was something that could be like that would, like this example of the painting, was were a lot of them that kind of way, that like you got this kind of premonition or some kind of advice that eventually happened?
some of them were, and this is something that a lot of times when our loved ones pass away, they're in a painful state, or they're in
Mm,
especially with an older parent, they're in a elderly state, right? And one of the actually the first dream, if you will, and now looking back, I would consider them more visits than
mm,
dreams. But one of the things, my mother and I went to Sedona, Arizona, a few times for when I was there for like a jazz festival. And the first dream I had after she passed away, and she was only 78, but we were walking down a path in Sedona, and the mountains there, if you've ever seen it, are just gorgeous. I mean, it's just nothing, it's just very, very colorful and brilliant against a blue sky. And in the first dream, we were walking down this path and the colors were just spectacular. And she put her hands out, and her hands looked like she was about 30 years old.
mm,
I mean, just young hands, you know. And she said, Lisa, she said, I'm out of pain.
mm.
And she said, I feel really good, and my love for you will never die. And so that really was the kickoff, but it wasn't a practical, rational data point
Right,
like the paint
right,
story, right? So,
right.
but that was kind of the kickoff when I realized how that energy. And then, I would tell people in the workshops, there's dreams, there's signs. Some people have signs, whether they have coins that appear on their paths or feathers or birds, whatever the case may be. So it was just a journey,
Yeah.
but
And
interestingly,
acceptance.
and acceptance, I think. Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
here's my perspective as someone that lost someone at an early age.
Mhm.
I felt that people were trying to convince me of this message.
Mm,
I f- and it wasn't serving me. Because it didn't make any sense to
sure.
me. You know, at that point, because I hadn't been having those experiences, I didn't quite understand the grasp of death and
Sure.
everything.
Yeah.
And so it's very interesting. But at the same time, my grandmother was very much like experiencing things like you describe. There was a moment. I don't know if I said this in my episode, but my mom was not my grandmother's daughter. My mom was really close with my dad's mom.
Mhm.
And that's the grandmother that I talk about regularly.
Mhm.
And so they were like best friends. And my grandmother had this refrigerator that the light would never turn on, like
Right.
ever. And she would replace it. Never did it turn on, ever. And she would complain about it till she was, you know, so mad about it to my mom. And probably about a week after my mom died, the light went on and it never burned out
Cool.
after that.
Yeah.
And my grandmother was like, you know, she that was just how she felt, like that was my mom fixing that for her after she died. And for me, it didn't make any sense, right? Like, 'cause I was just young. A lot of things don't make sense when you're 8 years old,
Sure.
but I know my grandmother attached to that. But what I found, because of that, my grandmother never truly grieved my mom, like grieved losing my mom. She always held on to it. Do you see that could be also a fear of like not moving through the full grieving journey
I think
because you are so
everybody's
attached to
grieving
it?
journey is different. And I think that, like Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, wrote the book about the stages. I don't think there's linear stages. I think that
Yeah.
everybody's unique, and I think that, like, I don't know if you're familiar with David Kessler. He wrote the sixth stage of grief, and it talks about purpose,
Mm.
and that's really important. I think
Yeah.
because when you lose somebody you love, whether you believe in after death or not,
Right.
you've got oftentimes a renewed purpose.
Yeah.
And like David Kessler writes that there's actually a saying even called post traumatic growth. And it has to
Mm.
do with after someone experiences a grief event, then whether they participate on a board for the American Heart Association, let's say if their loved ones has a heart attack, whether
Right.
they write a book, a short inspirational memoir, whatever the case may be, whether they just help others in a new way, the person is forever changed.
Mm-hmm.
Their spirit is forever changed. And I think that, again, whether people believe it or not is up to them. But I do believe that it helps people understand that life is just not finite, and that there's more than we can see and understand. And I think that even with workplace healing, it's clearly not, I don't go in with my spiritual message like I did with my grief support groups. But what I
Mm.
realized was, and even working in just a couple of examples of in the ad agency world in Chicago, I had a couple of incidences where there was a woman who didn't come to work on a Wednesday morning. And we found out later that afternoon that she had died by suicide the night before,
Mm.
and that this was in the early 90s. And at that point in time, there wasn't really a lot of discussion about mental health in the workplace, and it was very awkward, and
Yeah.
no one really talked about it, and just being in other such, and because death was always the elephant in the room.
We're all gonna do it
Yeah. and
at
and
some point.
yeah, or even situations where, and it didn't matter who believed what at that point in time. It was just very uncomfortable and awkward
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
sad. And then I had another situation where one of my coworkers was a young mom. She had three little kids at home, and her husband had a massive heart attack and died. And
Mm.
and when she came back to work, and I'm sure I don't recall exactly how many days bereavement she had, but when she came back to work, of course everybody was so sad and grieving for her and with her, but nobody said anything.
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
and so just having, like, the book mission, what I did there in that world, again, just giving permission to people. And one woman said, you're giving me, allowing a place, or witnessing my experience,
Yeah.
and letting me share and letting me talk. And if it's for their grief journey, phenomenal. If it helps
Right.
them in whatever journey they're on, excellent.
Might help them help someone else too, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Did you start writing that book for yourself, or
Yes.
was there a purpose? Okay, so it
No,
was more
I
of like a
honestly, I started writing it down because I'm like, for anything, I thought I'm going to leave this Word document for my daughter when I die,
mm, yeah,
because I want her to know that I'll be around, And
yeah,
so I just literally started it for my own healing. And then, maybe there are no such things as coincidences in life, but I happened to meet a woman who started
we'll
up.
find out someday.
Yeah, exactly. That's part of the puzzle pieces, I believe.
Yeah.
But I met a woman here in Kansas City that was starting a publishing company.
Oh
And she
wow.
said, I work with people like you that just they have an idea, they have a thought, but they don't know an art director who can design a cover. They don't know the steps in editing and how to make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
So literally, we would meet at Starbucks once a week after I had all my Word documents organized, and we went from there. So,
That's awesome.
and it's
Yeah.
interesting. Um, I came out in 2015, and
Mm-hmm.
then Mindy Corcoran, who's my partner with Workplace Healing. This is another no coincidence story, but of a friend had given Mindy my book.
Oh.
And then she reached out and said, I have the same feelings about my son, who
Mm.
was 14 when he was murdered, and my dad, and who was murdered along with her son by a white supremacist, a horrible tragedy here in Kansas City back in 2014. So, about the same time that was going on in her world, we didn't really know each other that well, but she had started a foundation, Post Traumatic Growth.
Mm-hmm.
Faith Always Wins after Reed and Bill Corcoran were murdered. And then I spoke at her foundation event
Oh,
in
wow.
2016. So then we, kind of our circles, our Venn diagrams began to overlap.
Yeah.
And then in May of 2018 or March in 2018, we ran into each other again and said, let's have lunch. And we sat down for lunch, and my father had just passed away, but coincidentally, the house had sold the week before. I'd gotten everything, the business of death wrapped up, as I talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And we sat down and said, what can we do in corporate America to help people when they come back to work? And
Yeah.
and not just help the grievers themselves, but help people talk about the elephant in the room. Because if we talk about the elephant in the room, we're helping people heal and
Mm-hmm.
bringing up grief awareness in the workplace.
Yeah.
So all
Yeah.
that puzzle pieces, they all kind of, like we said before, they just kind of mingle and come together again.
Well, and it all started I mean, you started earlier in the conversation saying like you weren't one to journal, you weren't
No,
one to
I wish
kind of write your
I was
ideas.
wanted to. It was on my list, Matt.
Yeah, of course. It's always on our list. I think there's a fear in it too. I think for people that are very left brained that have these orders and things, we're fearful of the lack of structure that comes along with journaling.
Perhaps.
We're fearful of what might come out. But what's interesting is that you dove into it. Was there a particular trigger that made you like, I'm going to start writing this down? Was it like instead of just keeping them in your head and telling other people about them?
I
Was there a
think they
reason
were
you wrote it down?
it was such a pivot for me. It was
Hmm.
so, what would be the word? Like almost somebody hitting me over the head saying,
Really?
pay attention.
Because
It was so dramatic that I had to write it down.
and the reason I ask this is like I I really do think that the first attempt at my healing journey really started when I was forced to write something in my 11th grade English class.
Mm,
And we were supposed to write like a personal narrative of something. And
mm-hmm,
I just felt compelled, like this was going to be the first time
mm-hmm.
that I was going to write about the moment, the time. Like I recall the opening paragraph was something about like on the 344th day of 1989, like at this particular time, like I was pinpointing this moment, but I truly think that writing experience, I think I called out of school for like the next couple of days after writing that because I think it unlocked
I'm
something.
sure it
I
did.
think, and
It's
it
like
was
a
8 years
cathartic
after.
moment.
Yeah. But like writing, it's so interesting because we can have all these thoughts in our head. They were the same thoughts that were existing in my head, but something about like, and this was back in the time before we had, I think we had word processors or something
Right,
that I
right.
wasn't about to write on,
Yeah.
because you can write one sentence and then print that and then write the next sentence and print that. But it was handwritten. And I really do think it kickstarted at least an opening or cracking open of something that kind of, I mean, it took a long time after that. But even to this day, when I need to process something, I find I don't journal. I don't like that. But I do know when I need to write and I do it. So it's
Mm-hmm.
very interesting that people are benefiting now from what you do because you opted to do something that was previously uncomfortable for you to do.
And in addition to uncomfortable, very vulnerable.
Or you not someone like that before?
I wouldn't say so. Yeah.
No?
To talk about not only
Oh, the
death,
spiritual side.
but and even though I may have believed it in my heart, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
sure I articulated it to the world. And what's interesting, when I first started doing some of these grief support events, this is before workplace healing, so this would be back in 2016, 2017. It was interesting that people believed me because of my experience in corporate America.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it makes sense though, because we all
So
grew up with
perhaps
that was.
that's why, on some level, if we look at, maybe that's why I was born to carry that message,
Yeah.
because oh, she's been in corporate America for over 20 years. She must not be crazy. you know,
Yeah.
talking about judgment, but and I'm curious, that's as I look back again, that's maybe a part of the puzzle piece.
I have an episode that I think you would like to listen to.
Uh-huh.
I spoke with someone, her name is Elizabeth Rosenberg, and she was someone that was regularly getting migraines through her
Mm.
whole life. She still gets them. Very successful in corporate America, work in the PR communications space. And during the pandemic, she leaned into something she was avoiding her whole life, which was kind of this spiritual mediumship, Akashic reading kind
Uh-huh.
of thing. The migraines started to be less severe. They kind of opened up these things. But the way she was so afraid to tell the world, like, this is what I do, like, I can do this. And to your point, people work with her because of that 20 years or however many years being a successful PR communications person. If she hadn't had that experience, she's convinced that maybe they wouldn't have listened, or maybe they
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, there's a weird societal piece.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? You did it.
Yeah,
And if that's the reason that they have to believe you, and that helps them on their healing journey, then it is what it is, right? At
exactly.
that point. But
Exactly.
I love that you've created this workplace healing to have the uncomfortable conversations. But part of me thinks that we just need like this worldwide like education
Yeah.
on how to talk about these things, because like we're all going to die at some point. We're all going to know someone that dies, and we're all going to experience the grieving process in our own ways and how we do that. But I think we all might have a better is not the right word, but a better experience in that if we weren't so ashamed of
Right.
something or some
Well,
part of it.
and I don't you think too with COVID, if you didn't understand
That helped.
grief before 2020,
Mm,
we like to say that grief is the loss of old ways,
mm,
and so with COVID, everybody knew that they lost some old ways. And it's almost like a universal understanding of grief. And we also realized, I feel like, now with 2023, we're recognizing that people cannot leave themselves at the office door or in their or in their apartment when they open their laptop to work remotely, whatever the case may be. You People are bringing their whole selves to work, and they have been since
yeah.
the beginning of work. But
Yeah.
as leaders, we don't often recognize that,
Yeah.
and
Or we
or
don't
don't
allow
want
it
to recognize that, right?
because it comes with more responsibility, because then we as leaders have to also be a fully formed human that brings all of us to work.
Hmm.
And I think there's vulnerability in that. And I think we were taught and conditioned to not be vulnerable, especially
Exactly.
in the workplace,
Hmm.
because it looks, or we've designated it as
As
weak, and it's
weak.
not.
Exactly. Exactly. And this is
Yeah.
what we tell the leaders that we work with, that we train, that we help develop. We say, it's empathy is affecting productivity. It affects
Hmm.
retention. It affects the bottom line, and there's
Yeah.
statistics to prove it. And it's when people are recognized at work. When people are like, let me just give you a quick story. We have a situation where one of our clients, a woman comes back to work. She's 55. Her mom just died. And literally, her boss walked around the perimeter of the office space so he wouldn't have to make eye contact with her
Mm.
because he was afraid she might cry, which he might cry, and they both might cry. And oh gosh, that's going to be horrible, vulnerable.
Oh, terrible.
Well, she left the company
Mm.
because
Yeah.
she felt like,
She didn't feel safe.
mm-mm. And
Yeah.
so that's the thing that we're trying to avoid. We want to help managers talk about the elephant in the room, and
Hmm.
then and talk about the fact that you can have a team lunch to talk about the coworker, my example before, or we have 148 tactics on our platform, but there's so many things that if people could just do this in the workplace, if they could be empathetic, if they could strengthen what we call your empathy muscle, it
Yeah.
helps people feel supported, it helps them feel belonged, it helps the culture.
Right. Well, and I think, There's I often have this conversation with people that have experienced grief is I think the outside since nobody's ever taught us how to be around someone that's grieving or to
Yeah.
help someone that's grieving,
Right.
we feel that we're supposed to fix it and we're not.
Mm-hmm.
We feel that, and then we say dumb things,
Right.
and then we offer advice that is not necessary and
Right.
not helpful.
Right.
And I think if we had some more conversations like this that
Mm-hmm.
you're offering in the corporate space, but just in general, I think we'd have a lot better of an experience
You're
because we'd all just be people with
absolutely
each
right.
other.
Absolutely right. And the biggest thing we found is that managers, supervisors, whatever you call it, don't know what to say to somebody. And
Yeah,
so then they don't say anything. And then to your point, the person feels alienated or they say something that's bizarre.
right.
And we always say, you know,
They're in a better place. That
oh,
doesn't help.
no, no, no. Mindy has stories about that one. She's like, no, no.
No, I mean maybe, but
Yeah,
no,
but
doesn't
it's
help.
right, does not help. Or for example, we'll tell a manager, you know, what is your mother's name? Yeah, what's your mom's name?
Joan,
Joan. Okay, so by me bringing up Joan's name, is it going to remind you that your mother passed away?
me?
Yeah, I'm just giving an example.
Mm.
Like managers think, like,
Oh,
like let's say a spouse passed away in the office, or and
yeah.
by me bringing up that spouse's name to the griever, is it going to remind them that he passed
Mm,
away? You know what I'm saying?
mm.
So
Yeah,
it's like, in on some cases, the person would like to tell a story about their husband who passed away, or
right,
whatever the case may be, or Joan. You know,
right. Yeah.
so
Well, and to your point, that this whole love never dies. The idea of this person, just because they died, they didn't cease to exist.
hmm
So they're still part of memories. They're still part of that person's life.
hmm
And to just ignore the fact that this has happened, I think that's really harmful to the person that's just lost that person because they're already thinking that. And now they're like, everyone else has moved on. And now I need to hold on to this, which then can prolong other things in their own personal journey. So I
yeah,
think there's a
yeah,
lot of repercussions that come with it. I mean, for me, you know, my mom died in 89.
hmm
Nobody was talking about anything, especially with kids
with
back,
kids,
back
yeah.
then. And so I saw around me that everyone wanted to make sure I was happy. And
Mm.
so it was gifts, it was trips, it was making sure he's doing all the things that he quote unquote wants to do. And so what that person, me, the young version of me, absorbed was that everyone needs to see that I'm happy. So I
It's a
need
lot of
to
pressure.
perform. I need to I became like, I was like a C student
I
before my
heard that
mom
on your
died.
podcast, and now you're this over the top overachiever A plus because
Right.
yeah.
Which is obnoxious, but I absorbed that because I figured, well, if I don't bring straight A's home, my dad might abandon me too.
Mm.
Because my mom abandoned me in my tiny little brain, not on purpose, but she's gone. Maybe I did something. And so, we absorb these things. And
Yeah.
so by what you're doing, it's going to trickle into the real world, because how many hours a week do we spend at work? It's a lot,
Yeah, I would say a
And
third
so
of our
if you,
lives.
right. And so if we're learning that and we're having real conversations, I'm hopeful that coming out of this pandemic, people have reevaluated
Mm-hmm.
who they are and what they stand for
Mm-hmm.
and how they want to interact with the world. I think. But I think, like you said, if you didn't have some of these capabilities before, you maybe learned something during COVID, but I think you also maybe pushed really hard against that and you
Mm-hmm.
still don't. And now
Mm-hmm.
it's worse.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a lot to be said there, but it's you guys are doing some good stuff in the world and probably changing a lot more lives than you realize that you are.
That's our vision. And it's
Yeah.
again, there's a lot of initiatives to support grievers. To your point earlier, there's grief
Mm,
support groups, there's employee assistance plans, there's therapy, but there's nothing that truly helps a team know what to do and say because
right.
they're walking around unsure, scared, awkward, walking on eggshells and
Feeling helpless.
feeling helpless. Great point. And then
Yeah.
then the downstream effect of that is you've got a person sitting at their desk, and we call it presenteeism, where you're sitting at your desk, you're looking at your laptop, everybody around you is walking on eggshells, and you're not thinking about work.
Hmm.
And nobody knows what to do or say to even help you in the
Yeah.
workplace.
So you walking through your journey with grief, writing through your journey with grief,
Hmm.
took you here to this version of you. What's different about you? Like what's the biggest difference between pre mom passing
Yeah. Uh,
and Lisa
I
now?
think that I'm back in the corporate world, which I love, and
Yeah.
I flourish in it because it really helps my left brain. But the difference is I'm balanced now. And
Hmm.
it's funny that I feel like in life we're often given the challenges that we know we need to perhaps overcome on some level. And
Yeah.
we say, and so coming from a very left brain pre 2011 mother passing state, and then moving into right. I mean, right brain, RIGHT, and WRIT, right and right. But moving into that space where I was very right and right brained and talking to people about signs and dreams and that kind of thing. And then with workplace healing, it's a balance of head and heart. It's
Hmm.
not just left, it's not just right, it's the balance. And interestingly enough, this is a bit of an aha moment that I'm having for the first time talking to you about this right now. But interestingly enough, we tell our potential clients and clients, we're helping you balance the head and heart of the workplace.
Hmm.
Because if you're all head, the emotional well being of the employee is not reflected. If you're all heart, the
Mm-hmm.
work doesn't get done. So we've got to find a balance. And I've found my personal balance. And now
Yeah.
that balance is being articulated and materializing with workplace healing because we're helping balance the head and the heart in the workplace.
When you were talking about that, I was totally picturing, like the justice
Yeah,
scales kind
yes,
of, and
yeah.
I was picturing like pre 2011 Lisa, like it was just like this side was all the way down, this
Yeah,
side was all the way up,
right.
and writing your book was was the thing that went like this, and now finding the balance with workplace healing. I kind of pictured that. That was the visual that came into
Yeah,
my
I mean, I
head.
saw it too. We're both on the same wavelength because, and honestly, again, articulating it right now with you on this podcast, I'm not sure I've ever said that to anybody before,
Mm,
but it really
yeah.
makes sense.
I think there's value in that's what I talk to a lot of people about, like this the power of like just telling your story and putting it out there, and how that it actually has a lot of power selfishly for like us,
Mm-hmm.
because like telling my story on the episode that you listened to when I was talking to my friend Kristen
Mm-hmm.
about my journey,
Mm-hmm.
and then listening back to it, I was like, wow, I don't think I've ever told the story from this point to this point. It was always like, here's a chunk, here's a chunk, here's a chunk. And what was so special about that episode is that when I told that story, my dad lived that experience with me, right? Like he was by my side and he lived all of those moments with me. And he got to hear me say it from beginning to end for the first time. And because, if we talk about it, then he's like, no, that's not what happened. If you were
Mm-hmm.
to have that natural conversation,
Mm-hmm.
and what it allowed for was this really lovely conversation about, like, almost like a healing conversation of, I
Mm-hmm.
didn't realize that's, what you were doing. Here's how I saw it from my side. And we really found a deeper understanding just through
I
me being
love
able
that.
to tell my story,
I love that.
and
That's beautiful. And as an addition to that, after I wrote my book, which is we'll call it very left
yeah.
brain, I would say that it helped my father and I, and he
Hmm.
was very right brained before he died, to see the left brain side of life.
Hmm. So in your book, can you, like, how is it structured? Is it more about your, like, the spiritual kind of awakening, or is it more about like, this is how I was and this is how I am kind of thing?
No, it's more about the experiences. So I would
Okay.
call it, maybe it is more of a spiritual awakening, but it's basically my stories
Mm-hmm.
to help people understand that when they feel something, it's not a figment of their imagination, and to open their
Right.
heart and just
And to like lean into
and
it.
to lean into it, right? And I think that, like, again, to your point with your dad, I mean, that's beautiful that he could listen to your experience and your
Hmm.
perception and what you were feeling. And like I said, that was a similar situation for me.
Yeah.
When my dad actually it was about a week or two before he died, and some things were happening in his life. There was some strange electrical occurrences going on.
Oh,
There was just some bizarre things going on in the house. There were some different things. And he said, Lisa, I finally believe. And but I mean it's interesting because you know, it's that left right brain and finding that balance.
yeah. I don't know. I think your story is about putting your story out
Yeah.
there and
And
the
being
power,
vulnerable.
well, and the power that it had to change your life.
Hmm.
Because think about it. If you didn't write that book, would you do? I mean, where would you be?
Hmm.
Right? Like, I feel
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
you putting those feelings and experiences on paper created the rest of these puzzle pieces kind of inching their way
Yeah.
towards each other.
Yeah. And
It might
quite
never have
frankly,
made it to the same box,
no, I probably wouldn't have met my co-founder
right?
to
You wouldn't
start
have,
to create this company called Workplace Healing.
right? Because if you hadn't written the book, then her friend wouldn't have sent her
Hmm.
the book. She would have sent her a different book,
Right.
right?
Right.
Something else. And it's always really interesting to me that when I talk to people here, most people, when they're compelled to do something and they kind of like push it off, and then when they finally do it, it's like, look at what it opened up,
I know. And
you know?
this is interesting. I just had this thought pop in. When I was kind of wrestling with my brain back in when I was having the experiences. So before the book came out, if you will,
Mm-hmm. Right.
I was like, oh, I don't have time to write a book. Okay, no one's going to read this book, and why am I going to write a book, right?
Right.
I listened to NPR a lot in the car, and I would literally, I kid you not, almost every day, I would get into the car, turn on NPR, and they'd say, and if you're writing a book, or, oh, this person just wrote a book. I mean, it would happen like daily. And I'm like, oh
Yes.
my goodness, is the universe is hitting me over the head saying, sit down and write something.
Yep. Yeah. And look what it did.
Hmm.
Look what it did for you.
Yeah.
Like, let's take everyone out of the equation. What did writing that book do for you,
Yeah.
for your soul? What did it do?
I would say growth is the first word that comes to mind. It was growth. It was growth in a personal journey. It was growth in being vulnerable with my story.
Yeah.
It was growth in understanding things that perhaps I couldn't see. It was growth in meeting. I met so many amazing people when I would do these workshops and talk to people from all, you know, just such a diverse group of amazing people. And doesn't matter religion, doesn't matter, but it was just a great group to learn from, and
Yeah.
I loved that.
Did writing that book and kind of healing in that way, did that change your relationships with like your daughter and your husband and your father?
Definitely with my father, because he was not, he was, if I was, let's say I was 70 on the left brain scale, George was 170, and which was worked well for him in his life. And I have no judgment. And I would say for our daughter, she was in fourth grade when my mom passed away, and immediately read the book after it came out. So she was about in seventh grade, I guess, when the book actually came out, and she immediately, she felt my mom's presence.
Mm-hmm.
And I think children, and you can speak to this, I'm sure, they don't have as much judgment in life. So they tend to look at things from an open-hearted perspective. And even as even at that point in her life, I mean, she was, I mean, happy for me, number one, that I felt it, happy for her grandmother that she was very close to,
Mm-hmm.
and we still have, and I'll just give you a quick sign. This is an example of a sign. This might be helpful to people. So during COVID, you know how our crazy world. So our daughter graduated high school in 2020. So
Mm.
talk about crazy for a high school
Yeah.
senior, right?
Yeah.
And then went to college in fall of 2020, and campus was shut down. Nobody was living in dorms, the whole bit. So, and this was in Washington, D.C. So Katie and her roommate are moving into an extended stay hotel. so they could have some sort of college experience and not sit at
Mm.
their parents' dining room table, okay, in Kansas. So,
Right.
so we're just moving in, and at the time, the exact time, I kid you not, when her roommate was pulling into this circle drive, this big monarch butterfly literally flew circles around my daughter's head. And for like 2 minutes, and I didn't have my phone with me. I would have loved to have like taken a little video, and we looked at each other and just truly knew in our hearts that that
Mm.
was Katie's grandmother, my mom, witnessing this bizarro college event and
Mm-hmm.
COVID, and
Yeah.
knowing that, you know, everything's going to work out.
Yeah. And follow through. Yeah. The reason I asked that is
Hmm.
because, you said that, this was also a practice in
Yeah.
vulnerability. And sometimes the people around us, we're also afraid to be as vulnerable with. And then when we put this all out into the world, it's like, oh, you can stop being so vulnerable now. It's a little bit much,
Yeah.
Matt. I'm kind of speaking about myself here, but I was curious to see if that like changed those relationships, because now your heart's more cracked open, right?
Right.
For the world to see. And
I think it was healthy
so,
for my family.
oh, for sure. I
Hmm.
mean, it sounds like it,
Hmm.
unless they weren't prepared for it,
Yeah.
and then that's a whole other
Right.
story.
It was
If
healthy.
you could, yeah, if you could go back to the Lisa that your mom just passed away, knowing what you know now, is there anything that you would say to her about this upcoming journey that she was about to
I'd
go
say
on?
thank you,
Hmm? Why would you say thank you?
because I think that her ability to help me open my heart with the
Hmm.
signs, with the dreams, with all the bizarro circumstances that were happening, have led me to a really beautiful journey today.
Yeah, it sounds like a really rich life, like really impactful, heart rich. I mean,
Hmm.
in the
Hmm.
sense that, like, I don't know, it feels like when you know, or when you get an inkling that there is some impact being made that's beyond the bottom line, that's beyond, all those performative measures that we've all been trained to say that is success. I think there's a different feeling there. It feels very rich. And that's kind of how I feel about this show.
Yeah. Hmm.
I feel when I hear from people, they'll send me like a DM on social media saying, I really needed to hear that episode today because X, Y, and Z, this is what I'm going through. And I really thought I was the only person going through this.
Yeah.
So thank you. And that's like, I can imagine how much of that you feel because of the impact that just putting your experiences down on paper has led you to,
Hmm.
with the current journey that you're on.
And just it's and I feel like we're all, we're born, we have gifts. Everyone has gifts. And if we don't use our gifts that we feel intuitively that we have, then I feel like life would feel less meaningful. And the thing that's very gratifying about today for me personally is that these gifts, whether it's left brain marketing know how or the vulnerability of the book, and then bringing awareness into the workplace that people are struggling with grief, helping people understand the prevalence of grief, and how people are truly affected. If I didn't bring that gift, I think I would feel like I wasn't meeting my life objective or something, you know?
Yeah. I don't, it's really hard for me because I could never 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, imagine that this would be my journey
Right.
right now.
Yeah.
And the fact that I leaned into it, and now, recording, I have like 100 something scheduled already to record of this episode of this show. And that 8-year-old would never have imagined that.
No.
And even the 2 years ago or the year ago that I started this podcast, I didn't know that there was still areas that I was trying to heal. And so, this journey, like you say, like it's fulfilling that purpose. It's feeling like, oh, I was always supposed to get to this point. And because I was, quote unquote, brave enough to start, this is what unfolds.
Hmm. You
And
said
I'm
it
sure you can relate
beautifully.
to that. It's hard. I think that I had to go through all these things though.
Hmm.
and I
Hmm.
also say this with sadness coming out of my mouth, I wouldn't change anything,
Right.
and because had my mom not died in that particular way, I wouldn't be here right now. Had I not sat with my grandmother for the last 96 hours of her life and watched her take her last breath, I wouldn't be this version of me. Had I said like the plane flight was too expensive or whatever it may have been,
Hmm.
I wouldn't be in this place.
Right.
So I wouldn't change anything. And I think that takes a lot to come to that
I agree.
awareness
Yeah, I
and
agree.
and comfort.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your story and your journey. And I think people will get, it's when I looked at what you submitted, I was like, okay, well, she's going to talk about her mom passing. And I don't think that is a very big pivotal piece. But I think this book and putting these experiences into words and putting it out into the world, I think a lot of people will take some value in that and leaning into that vulnerability, because I think a lot of people are afraid of it.
Hmm.
And it kind of just shows that like it's just baby steps at first. It's just little steps that can take you on this wild journey. And so thank you for just being a part of this.
Well, it's my pleasure. And again, it's been a really fun opportunity to meet you, and awesome. And I mean, I will say that it's been awesome to understand that perhaps on a simplistic way, it's all about the balance of head and heart. Maybe this is
Yeah.
all we're supposed to do, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's important, especially for people like I'm in my 40s now. My generation was very much taught to it's all about the performance, the success, the head part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's important to understand that as full humans, we need to balance all the pieces that come along with it and not
Yes,
just like the thinking part, because I think there's a lot more to life than that. And
exactly.
you've discovered that after years of success in the corporate world and coming back to it, you probably have quite a different experience in the corporate world now, or appreciation for it in a different way
Mm-hmm.
than you did before.
Mm-hmm. Truly.
Yeah. If people want to learn more about you or connect with you or just talk with you, is that a thing? And can you
Yeah,
share
yeah.
where they can do that?
I've got well, workplace healing. So one side, that's our website is called workplacehealing.com.
Okay. We'll put that
and
in the show notes
and
too.
we've got a lot of resources for people too. We've got some great articles, and then not only about how to work with people that are going through a grief event, but also how caregiving. What's that
Mm.
like when you're working with someone who's a caregiver? I think about like you and your grandmother, or
Hmm.
if you were a full time caregiver for her, what would that look like? If you were trying to
Thankfully, I
work.
wasn't.
Yeah. So workplacehealing.com is our business where we are training leaders on how to respond to grievers and caregivers in the workplace. One of our goals too, Matt, is to eventually get to a point where the software is expanded. Our software is called a human recovery platform. So helping humans recover when they come back to work via the teams. And we've also, if it might be helpful to some of your listeners, as I mentioned, there's resources, there's articles, just a whole
Yeah.
array of things. And then my book, lisakcooper.com, is my book website. And I will say in full vulnerability, I don't have time to update the blogs on that website anymore. But it's where the book is on Amazon now. You're My Voice.
Perfect.
It's called You're My Voice, How Love's Voice Never Dies.
Awesome. We will put all those
Okay,
links.
yeah.
And are you a social person or no social media kind of person?
Oh no, we for workplace healing, we're very active on LinkedIn because that's
Okay.
our target audience.
Yeah.
So
Right.
very very active on LinkedIn.
Okay.
We also, with workplace healing, we do have a Facebook page, and then with the book, I haven't been as active on social media with that lately, just because of workplace healing. But
Right. Yeah. Understood.
yeah,
It's on Amazon. People can find you.
yeah,
We will put all that information
okay,
in the show notes so that people can check out your information and
okay.
check out your book. And, you never know
Yeah.
who's
Well,
listening
I hope
and
that,
what they
again,
need.
just our goal is to, you and I on this podcast, to raise awareness. So
Yeah.
if we can bring a little glimmer to someone's world, amazing.
Exactly. I
Hmm.
tell everyone maybe too many times Success for me for this show is measured if each episode finds the ears that need to hear it at that moment in time, then we
Yes,
win, right?
absolutely.
If we help one person, it sounds really small, but I think it's really big because that one person can then help other people. And so there's a lot of trickle down effect and trickle around and trickle up and all over the place.
Yeah, I
So
love it.
thank you for being a part of this. Thank you for, we had a little tech issue, so hopefully nobody can hear those when I edit those out, but thank you for being a part of this. And for those of you listening, I'd love it. I'm going to ask for something different this time. I'd love it if you are listening to an episode and you're really enjoying it, if you could share it with a friend. I think that does even more than reviews and ratings. So I'd be so appreciative of that. And we'll be back next week with a brand new episode of the Life Shift Podcast. Thanks again, Lisa.
Thank you, Matt.